Moving to Canada. Lots of people, well, not lots, but some have been talking about that. I'm bringing someone on the show now who I have talked before from Canada, Gail Robertson. Good to see you. Tell me a little bit and everyone again about you. You live not too far away from me, even though we're in two separate countries.
Yes, we are actually quite close. I live in Windsor, Ontario, in Canada, but that's right across the border from Detroit, Michigan. It's like almost like on a good day, someone could hit a golf ball across the Detroit River from Windsor, Detroit. I can be from my house to the Detroit airport in like half hour to 40 minutes. That's how close we are. I can go from downtown Detroit, downtown Windsor, downtown Detroit. If there's no traffic, you can be there in like 7 minutes, 5 minutes. It's really
Wow.
nice.
I'm up in Saginaw County, Michigan. You're closer to the airport in Detroit than I am, and you're in Canada.
There you go. And yes.
So, what do you, I got in contact with you on social media somehow, and do you do like marketing? You do a lot of different things, right?
Yeah. So I do, right now I do a lot around public relations and social media strategy. So I help people with their overall big picture strategic consulting. And then I also do shows like this, and I comment on what's happening when it comes to media. I am a recovering journalist. So I used to work in mainstream media. I haven't been doing that for quite a number of years, but a lot of the principles still apply. I've become even more interested in the last number of years, especially since COVID, with how everything has been shifted. Some people have studied this a lot longer. I really woke up when I started to see things happen in Canada, which we're going to talk about, is the difference. I used to say, oh, Canada was land of the free. We had so many more freedoms than I thought even the Americans. And well, I'm eating my words on some things now, because in recent years, I would say, depending on which state you're in versus Canada, we had during COVID, one example was that you couldn't get on public transportation to go from one province to another. So if you wanted to take a bus or a plane, if you weren't vaccinated, you could not travel. So if you had family in another province, you needed to be, and you want to take public transportation.
Wow.
Now, what's interesting about that also impacts people who are the most vulnerable, people who have the least amount, maybe financially. If you can drive, you get in your car, right? If you have a private airplane, you just go there.
True.
But if someone that wanted to take a bus or a train, even within Ontario, like if you want to take a bus up to Toronto from here, you needed to show your vaccination status. So that's where there was things like that. And obviously we had, the convoy, the issue in Ottawa.
Yeah.
Yep. And yeah, so I don't know if I'm jumping ahead. So
no, not really. And I think COVID opened up, COVID was very bad, but it opened up the eyes to a lot. Education, freedom of information, transparency. It opened up the world, I think, about independent journalism. It opened up a lot of eyes. It did, I think.
Yes. And we've also seen a real shift. When I was working in mainstream media, obviously I've seen a major shift between what's happening in mainstream versus where we are now. And it's like the steady decline at the same time as we see independent people like yourself. I mean, I discovered you because of, I think it was Twitter and TikTok. That's where I think it was actually TikTok originally.
Yeah.
So this is where more and more people are starting to have their eyes open and get information from other places. They're not relying only on one source through mainstream media. And you start to see the shift. When I'm talking to people, I can always tell when they only listen to mainstream media versus people who are listening in podcasts, right? Podcasts are doing phenomenally well. Yes.
Yeah, and that showed in the election.
Mm-hmm.
I thought Kamala Harris was going to win. And I assumed people in the United States the majority would not be able to see through a lot of the media charade or bubble. But I interviewed a lot of people and they said, no, they see through it. A lot of people voted for Joe Biden before. And a lot of it was the economy, but many too saying the media just lost it lost its grip. And it's sad because they did it to themselves, honestly.
Yes. And I think a lot of people, I am someone who initially, I heard about Joe Rogan. So I'm the kind of person, if I hear someone like, saying, okay, they're not good or they're dumb or there's that, I want to go find out for myself. I want to do original research. So I used to think, I thought he was this knuckle drag. I thought he was I started listening to his show. I was so blown away. And this, I say, as a journalist, as someone who has, I'm more suspicious about things, but he would do these like, I'd listen to 3-hour interviews. Sometimes when I'm on a road trip or I'm in the kitchen doing something, I listen to his shows. And I tell you, it was remarkable. I also heard when he had Dr. Robert Malone on, again, early on during the pandemic. And at that point, Dr. Malone had been banned from other platforms. And I went, wait a minute, how can Dr. Robert Malone, who I'd known because of his work, and that's where I can remember where I was when I heard that interview. I was in my car driving out in the county, and it was like this moment of, oh my God, this is, if it wasn't for Joe Rogan's show, I wouldn't have heard about what he had to say. And more people like yourself. I mean, when I follow some of your things that you're covering, you are someone who can, tell stories without that, like you're curious, you are asking those questions.
But we'll get to the consultants at the TV station always told me no one wants to listen to a 2-hour, 3-hour broadcast. Their attention span is so small. But I think that's proven the opposite. If you give people good content, they will engage with it. And the consultants at the TV station were wondering, why are all these people watching Joe Rogan? How can they sit and listen to this? Because I was always told in television, my stories had to be 1:30, 2 minutes. Don't go over 2 minutes. Mm-hmm. And it's proven if you give people good quality content, authentic,
right,
they'll listen or watch it. Yeah.
Yes. No, I agree. I think that there is a push towards those short sound bites, because when you do that, you have more control over the narrative or the story, right? And one thing that when I listen to Joe Rogan, you can tell sometimes he doesn't even know where it's going to go.
He doesn't.
And I like that he pushes back. I was listening to actually an older interview with Barry Weiss, and I was kind of surprised because I'm kind of a Barry Weiss fan until I heard her kind of talk smack about Tulsi Gabbard, and I was like, but Joe kept asking her questions, but he wasn't doing it in a really mean way. It's just he questioned her, and you could tell she was uncomfortable. And
I like that. I like that. Right. Yeah, you can't hide. You can't be fake on that show.
Right.
And that's why I like interviewing someone like you and airing the whole thing, because soundbite clipping and interesting. Okay, I better move on.
Yeah.
Let me show you a headline. Gen Z Americans rush to explore, move to Canada since Trump's election win. So you are in Canada, and there's been videos of people going through the Detroit-Windsor Tunnel and headed to Canada. What will people expect if they live in Canada, they move to Canada? What are Americans going to expect if they end in your country?
Well, one thing I'll say is buyer beware. So, and what I mean by that is do your research. I mean, obviously, I'm in Canada. I'm Canadian. I'm a proud Canadian, but I'm a Canadian based on what historically what Canada stood for, and what's happened more recently has been this shift, as we talked about earlier, towards losing more and more freedoms and rights. And we are under right now a liberal government, but it's not liberal in the true sense of what used to be what liberal stood for. So, for example, during the convoy up in Ottawa, there were people that made donations. So even if they made, there was people made $50 donations, and they ended up getting their bank accounts frozen. So it was things like that, and we had our prime minister refer to people who were non-vaccinated as those people, and then said those people, racist, misogynist, white supremacist, all these name calling. Now, what's interesting, Dave, is I was watching the trucks as they were leaving BC. and it was mostly through TikTok, right? And I'm following, and I'm thinking, why aren't they getting prepared in Ottawa? They kind of blew it off and thought, oh, these people are, not very, they didn't think they were going to follow through. What happened was they did follow through. They had quite a large following. And here's the other thing I'd say about beware. We have right now 2 people from the convoy that they were arrested in the summer of 2022. They're still on mischief charges.
Wow.
Let me say this again.
Wait, are they in custody?
No, they're not in custody, but Tamara Litch was in custody for weeks, I think a couple of months. It was crazy because at the same time, we have people getting out on bail, reoffending, that are doing horrific crimes. So these two people, because they were seen as leaders. Now, if you were on social media and following what was happening, and to this day, you know, they weren't like in control of everything. Trust me, they were not. I had been following a lot of this, but they were deemed to be the leaders, the ringleaders, I guess. So I see it as a reporter. What's happened really is they've been made, you know, they're used as an example, right? To really put fear into people. And yet there's very little coverage of this in mainstream media. I have to go to Twitter. I follow True North. So I get for people listening and say, hey, Gail's talking about not following mainstream. Where do we go? So I would recommend people like Blacklocks, and I can send you links to this. Blacklocks. Holly Doan is an amazing writer, comes out of mainstream media that covers Ottawa, mostly Ottawa area, federal issues. And then we have True North. We do have Rebel News, which is, as its name applies, but they are doing things that really some of the mainstream media should be doing as well. They should be challenging. And when I went to university for journalism, one of the things that attracted me to media was that it was about changing the world, and also challenging authority, being the fifth estate, asking questions, and not just accepting what politicians or what even the leader has to say. One last thing I just want to say about the media too here in Canada, it's heavily subsidized by the government. CBC, I think, I don't have the number here. I think it's like $1.4 billion a year goes to our state broadcaster. The other newspapers also get subsidies. That is so troubling to me as a former journalist, that how can you cover a government that you know is giving you money? And I was a fundraiser at one point in my life, and I would say, you do not bite the hand that feeds you. So if someone's giving you money, you wanted to make sure that you were taking good care of them so that they continue to give you money. It's kind of something that makes sense in human nature.
So moving to Canada, financially, I know like Toronto, for example, it's expensive as can be. When it comes to the price of living, grocery, the price of living, what financially would someone be in store for if they were to leave the United States and go to Canada? Would it just be an amazing thing and help them financially?
No, I would say, especially right now, we are facing a lot of problems in terms of the high cost of groceries. I mean, we have people sometimes that, you know, a dozen eggs, people are reporting upwards of $5, $7, $8 a dozen. Now that's
you're having that as well. Okay.
That's Canadian. Now, if someone is coming here and getting paid in US dollars, as we talked about earlier, I mean, the US dollar right now is much compared to Canadian dollar. Our Canadian dollar is tanking. It's terrible right now for people going over to the States. But so if you're bringing your US money over here, there may be some advantages to that, but then you're going to have to still look for a home and, you know, find the area that you want to live in. And here's the other thing that's happening in Canada that is very disturbing, as someone who's been following this in non-mainstream. You don't hear about this in mainstream, is the number of protests that we have. We have the, you know, Palestinian protests that are, and I'm trying to use the right terms, depending on what you use, you know, not to, that's the wrong word, but they're having prayers in the middle of downtown Toronto in the streets. And the police have said, well, they're kind of standing back and letting this happen. The mayor of Toronto is letting a lot of these things happen. And I think it is hurting in terms of tourism and such. But if you, certain cities, Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver, they're having these protests. And this is just in that issue, quite apart from what's happening with the Indian protests. And I mean East Indian, and that one I'm not as aware of, not as up on some of those, but we have protests like that happening. And the police are, I mean, out in Calgary, they were making some arrests when people were sitting in the middle of the street and blocking traffic. We had the same thing, I think, that you have too at universities, where there's been, I mean, the level, I will say this, the level of anti-Semitism that I've seen in Canada has been probably the most shocking to someone like myself, because I didn't know that the number of people that were prepared to go out and protests in Jewish neighborhoods, at synagogues, and at Jewish owned businesses. So this is about a conflict that's happening not in Canada, but people are going into these areas, and it's been very disturbing to myself, because I don't see a lot of coverage about this. So again, these are all things, when I go back to buyer beware, people really need to understand what they may be moving into, because they say frying pan fire, and we have a current government is spending money like they're just handing it out right, left, center, which sounds, you think, okay, that sounds
familiar.
good.
Yeah.
And they also have just brought in this new tax cut to the GST, a goods and service tax. And they're saying it's for Christmas and for help families, but they're targeting certain things, like, now, for one is diapers. Now, I would say they should remove the tax off diapers, like all the time, not just for a 30-day window, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So there's other things like that so they're offering up this tax break. But again, when you look at, okay, if you have a small business, what impact will that have on your business? You now have to change over your point of sale. And then some people now will delay shopping until after December 14th, which is when this kicks in. So now I'm finding out some of these things through some of the independent places, independent media, not mainstream media. Mainstream media is just saying, this is great. They're slashing the tax. They're giving money back to people. And it sounds amazing, except one day we're going to have to pay the piper, as they say. So that's my concern, is that listen, if you're going to cover these stories, cover them, but then also talk about the impact long-term, because, you may be getting this $250 that they're supposed to be getting next spring if you make under 150,000. But then we have a carbon tax that'll be kicking in. And then you're going to be paying GST on your hydro bills. You pay GST on your hydro and on the carbon tax. So it's like a double tax. It's just, yeah.
So leaving the United States. I mean, some people, and I guess people are actually doing it. They're saying, all their rights are going to be taken away with Trump as president and so forth. And they're leaving, they're going to Canada. It's a great place and everything's amazing, but there's no perfect place.
Yeah.
And I thought many people were joking, but there are actually people doing it.
Yeah.
And I've been to Canada. I was, especially as a kid, I've been there. I like the people there, but just I can't imagine politically. I mean, it's not like they're in Central America under attack in this country. It's not,
Yeah.
it just floors me. It's shocking that someone would move for just that political reason. And I know I'm not in their headspace, but it's just,
well, I think, there will be people that will move, because there's some people aren't open to seeing the fuller picture. And I've been someone that's following because of where I live, because of someone like yourself, because I have done work in the world of manufacturing with people in the US. So I've talked to a lot of people, and I always want to know, this was previous. Okay, why do people support Trump? What is it about it? Right. And I talk to people and I listen. I don't say, oh, you're dumb. You don't know what you're talking about. You're stupid. No, I mean, people are not happy with what's happening in the way the pendulum has swung so far one way, that people are saying, wait a minute here. Like, and the other thing that's interesting that in the US right now, I mean, you have more Democrats in the Republican Party at the leadership level than true Republicans, which is kind of interesting. And I also find it interesting when people are, attacking someone like Elon Musk. Now, I happen to be someone who supports Elon Musk for these reasons. One is he, brought into Twitter free speech and, less censorship. So that, because once I looked into the Twitter files and started looking at Matt Taibbi and Michael Schlesinger and Barry Weiss, and I went, okay, these are all respectable people when it comes to media. Yeah. So, it's and he's got a brilliant mind. So for people now to all of a sudden say they don't like Twitter, they're not going to buy a Tesla because they're mad at Elon Musk because he supported Trump. I mean, I just find some of these things very unusual because it really is about, and I talk a lot about curiosity. We need to take a page from Ted Lasso. A lot of people hear me talked about this, be curious, not judgmental. And I guess because I do have such a wide range of people in my circle, among my friends of different cultures, different religions, different political views. And I appreciate that. That's how I, have such I think a rich life is by having those different views. So back to what you were saying. Yes, I think people feel like, oh, and I've heard this, oh, women's rights and this and that. And I really, here's my take on
Yeah,
this.
what would you say to those people if
Yeah.
you hear, a group of people in the Detroit Windsor Tunnel, we're coming over, Canada is going to save us. We're going to be it's a great land.
Well, we have an election next year, and right now our Liberal and NDP, it's a coalition basically. I mean, they are at 20% in the polls, and the Conservatives are at 43%. So we're going to have a shift in at the next election. So
Really?
yeah. So that's the other thing is that and our current prime minister, when he said this, I remember thinking, and his party, his caucus said this, and I was shaking my head going, oh boy, this is not going to end well. They were talking about, maple syrup MAGA, that the current conservative leader and conservatives are these, and it was very anti-MAGA. And I thought, better be careful, because if Trump gets in, I don't think he's going to appreciate that. And he has not. And
No.
no. And
So let me ask you. So I think people think that all of Canada is very left wing, very progressive. There's not many conservatives at all. And if they move to Canada, they'll be surrounded by everyone who thinks like the far left. Is that not true?
Well, here's what's happened in that world. I would have said, if you had interviewed me prior to COVID, even like say 10 years ago, it would have been probably a different conversation.
Okay.
And what's happened with the Liberal Party, is that they've shifted almost to, because of the NDP, they have a coalition. Because when Trudeau decided to call the election in 2021, so he was in power since 2015, but I think he thought he would get an even bigger majority. And what happened was he went to a minority, and he had to now work with the NDP. That's the New Democratic Party. That's our more left leaning. Okay. So what's happened though is the NDP party, which used to be the party of the people, the party of the workers, the unions, well, they've now sort of shifted into focusing on more topics that are not as comfortable for many people that are parents, that are workers. And then Pierre Poilievre of the Conservatives sort of stepped in and started talking about workers' issues. He was
kind of what's happening here, kind of what's happening with the United States.
Exactly. So that's what's happening. So now we have someone like Pierre Poilievre, and people are saying the same thing about him, and almost like that he's another Trump. He's this right-wing, extreme, far right. And what's interesting, as I said, I do my research. So I read the book. There's a book about Pierre Poilievre by Andrew Lawton. I read that. And there's also a book on Justin Trudeau called The Prince, written by someone who was a journalist who would have been more supportive. I recommend to everybody in Canada to read both those books, and then decide how you want to vote next time.
So people move to Canada, they might be, if Canada changes, they're like, oh, what other country do we get to move to? I mean, what is your take on that? Is it, you probably heard it, we're moving to Canada, we're moving here, we're moving there. Canada's a great place. America's a great place. People are just, maybe they're not seeing the reality. This is still a great country. Canada's still a good place. What is it?
I think you've nailed it. There's pros and cons, in anything. I always say, whether it's a relationship, whether it's where you choose to live, whether it's how you deal with your children. I mean, there's always going to be some pros and cons. And I'm always someone who believes you take the best, leave the rest. So there's many great things about the States, but it also depends which state you're in, right? If you look at in the US, so when they talk about, and the issue that always comes up, and as a woman, I was at this, like, the issue of abortion and abortion rights and abortion and pro-choice and pro-life or pro-abortion, whatever. It's one of those wedge issues, much like how the vaccine was used as a wedge issue, which is to pit people against one another.
Yeah.
And it's not that I'm pro-choice, but I've also said I'm pro-life. I'm both. Like, and I feel the same thing. Like, it's interesting that people that say, you know, oh, women's my body, my choice. Oh, except when it came to the vaccines. So I said, there's a lot of hypocrisy. And that's what I always question. I said, listen, if you're going to be pro-choice, you can't pick and choose. I've had the same discussion with people that may be pro-life, but are also in support of capital punishment. I said, you kind of, those are opposite issues. Now, I think people tend to look at some of those issues very well. They look at the, capital punishment as very personal. Because someone asked me, like, what if someone did something to my child? I probably would have a different view about it than I do as a bigger picture. Much like, you know, hitting your children. If you hit your children, I don't know if you can say don't hit. Oh, whack, right? So yeah, I think it really is about determining the bigger picture, step back and really think about what is at stake. And I think what I see happening in the States is that this is not an outsider that have been following this as a Canadian. Yeah. Number one is most Canadians don't really understand how the US politics works. So they comment on, you know, they don't understand there's two-party system. People aren't always voting for Trump. They're voting against the Democrats. That's one thing. I don't think it's going to be as great as they say. And I don't think it's going to be as bad. I think it's going to settle out somewhere. And I just, again, encourage people to go do some original research. So when you hear someone like Robert Kennedy Jr. saying that he's an anti-vaxxer, go actually listen to what he's saying. He's not against vaccines. He's against the idea of not getting full disclosure. And also, most people think the vaccines of our childhood, maybe my childhood, I'm not sure about yours, but our childhood versus current day is the same. It's not. There are extra things in those. So it's really about going and, you know, not just grabbing that soundbite and, you know, you cannot like him. You can attack him because of the brain worm. And I just want to say this too. I find it interesting about some of the people that have attacked him and called him names because and things he's done, and he's done horrible things when he was younger and that. Well, he was a heroin addict. He's talked about this, right? And I thought Robert Kennedy Jr.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
So, and I always thought being progressive and being on the left, which is where historically I might have leaned at one point, and I still think I'm that way, but aren't we supposed to have compassion and understanding for people that have overcome addictions and changed their life? So it seems to be we pick and choose who we want to lift up and say, oh, well, they used to be an addict. And we should bring them into the fold. Oh, except for RFK, we don't like him. And he used to be a very big environmental lawyer. Again, I've done a lot of research, looked at him. I actually have the Fauci book right now that I'm reading because I'm like, that's a big one. It's a big lift. I
need to get that. So yeah, people just need to do a little research. Democracy is not ending. The country is not going. One of the networks here, MSNBC, leading up to the election, we are not going to have a country anymore if he's elected. It's all over. And now they're still saying the same thing. But I think that's what's opening people's eyes and the people that are moving to Canada. I got to get out of the country. They're just hearing the sound bites and the scare tactics from several people. But I think they're realizing, hopefully people will. And if they move to Canada, they'll realize it's not all roses there either.
And Canada has changed drastically in the last 10 years, like including, listen, it's going to be painful when very likely the Conservatives are going to get in the next election. And I tell you, we have to do something about our debt and deficit. Like, we can't just keep, spending. And I said, like, even now with this, giving everybody $250 and offering up these like tax cuts, but they don't say like, we're going to get hit with this carbon tax next year. And it's just like, you go round and round. And I said, one of the things that probably needs to happen is we do need to examine some tax cuts and look at how we can have a tax cut, but also pay off all of these expenses.
Well, what if a lot of our leftists move to Canada and then it switches to conservative? They're gonna have to find another country to move to now.
Well, and that's the thing, like, it's interesting. It's like, I guess it's like maybe there's an analogy of people that, jump from relationship to relationship, keep looking.
Yeah.
The grass is greener over here. Oh, wait a minute. It's over here. Oh, it's over here. And, when you're constantly looking for that perfection, it's very hard to find perfection because it's really not even something that is reality, right? There's no such thing, because you're always on a journey. I always said it's like, when I'm working out at the gym, I go, I'm not going to get to like, oh, I don't have to go anymore, I'm done. No, it's constant, right? So yeah. And I will say, like, I'm a proud Canadian though. Like, I do still have love in my heart for this country. So it's not, I just know that we need to work on some things, make some changes, and have a country that I can, when I travel internationally, I want to wear my maple leaf. I was in Portugal last year, and when I said I was from Canada, it was interesting. The comments I heard, first time I've ever traveled internationally like that, where I had people say so. They were like, "Oh, are you doing okay?" And like the people that knew what was happening, especially because of like the mandates and that, I was surprised. And this one young man that I spoke to, he was very up on more on politics and that. So yeah, that never used to happen. It used to be you wore your Canadian flag and people wanted to, like, they were jealous of our country. And
wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I appreciate you enlightening people that it's not going to be, it may not be just paradise going to Canada. There is no paradise, and people need to be happy among who they are. And yeah, it's just interesting to see. And hopefully we can meet up soon, and I'll do an interview in person.
Yes. Well, come over to Canada. It's so close. And to all of your listeners, I hope, I have recommended you to people. In fact, now when I said I was coming to your show, they go, "Oh yeah, I know that guy." So
that's cool.
I really encourage people to listen to follow a wide range of people too, right?
Yeah, and things you don't agree with. I listen to all different sides. And some people think, "Oh, how can you listen to that network?" I'm like, I want to hear what they're all saying.
Yes.
Yeah.
I remember when I first saw you, I think you were still working in more traditional, but I knew right then, I thought, this is a person that is curious, and he is someone who, I remember seeing you with your kids, and I thought, you are a good person, and you were, though, ready to explore, like, you're not just into seeing things through this narrow view. And
that upsets a lot of people, because if Trump does something stupid, I'll call him out on it, or I'll bring it up. But yeah, anyway,
he's gonna do some stupid. That's the thing though. He kind of was out there. He's gonna be who he is now. I think that's the other thing, is people gave him a mandate. He it's going to be, as I said, my one friend said, "I'm glad I got a new popcorn popper," because we're sitting there going, "Oh, what's going to happen?" I mean,
it's going to be interesting. But yeah, you don't need to leave the United States. Our democracy's not ending. You can you can visit Canada, and I'm sure you'd be happy to have some visitors as well. So
yes, another story would be someone from the UK. Now it's scary there. That is very frightening. What I'm seeing.
Ellen DeGeneres is moving there. She posted, actress Ellen DeGeneres. She's moving to the UK. Yeah.
But I think there's more to that story. I don't think it's
there's a lot more probably to that. But thank you for joining us. I'll have to have you on again. Thank you so much.
Okay. Anytime, Dave. Have a great day.